Hey all you cool cats and kittens, it's Jack Scott Bolin here, and I'm presenting over herpes. So, first off, a warning, some of these images in this presentation are triggering and sad. I did my best to make sure the images represented the disease in the most accurate way, and I left out some of the more gruesome and or sad images that could have bothered some people. So they're pretty tame images, but they're still images of a disease. All of us have these presentations over these diseases that oftentimes are pretty gross. So just a warning that some of these images may be pretty gross. So what is herpes? Herpes is an infection caused by the herpes simplex virus. It's pretty common and well known. It causes sores, blisters, and other symptoms, and is easily transmitted through contact. So I think we've all heard of what herpes is. We've all heard people talk about fever blisters or cold sores, stuff like that. That's more than likely all herpes. We all know what it looks like. So let's get started with some more of the specifics. So the causative agent, put this up here. Causative agent is HSV, or herpes simplex virus. This is from the family of viruses called Herpes viridae. This is a pretty large family. There's actually like 100 types of herpes, but there's only 8 that infect humans. So of those 8, it gets broken up into a couple subfamilies. The subfamily that I'm going to be talking about today is alpha herpes virinae, which holds the HSV1 and HSV2 types of herpes, which is oral herpes and genital herpes, or herpes in the mouth and genital herpes. Those are the 2 most common types of herpes. So when you hear people talking about herpes, they're more than likely talking about one of these 2 types. So yeah, they're in the subfamily of alpha herpes virinae and the genus of simplex virus. Transmission. HSV1 and HSV2 are transmitted through contact, and the only reservoir is humans. So it's pretty easy to prevent, but it's also very common, so I'll get into that a little bit later. Someone who has HSV1s, their sores spread it when they kiss, or when someone uses a toothbrush. You have these sores on your mouth, and they have pus and whatnot. And so if you're kissing someone and they come into direct contact with those sores, that's contact. They can be transmitted that way. If you share toothbrushes, guys, don't share toothbrushes. It's not smart. Also, while I was doing research, I saw some things. It's as simple as if I were to rub my face with a towel, and then someone came through and used the same towel to rub their face, it can be transmitted that way. So that's how HSV1 oral herpes can be transmitted, and then a person infected with HSV2 genital herpes spreads it through sexual contact. So it's the same thing. There's those blisters, those sores. They come into contact with skin during intercourse, and that's how it can spread that way. And as we talk about prevention later, this is pretty important. So we're looking at the symptoms here. Symptoms, if they manifest, are going to manifest in painful blisters. For HSV1, these blisters can occur specifically on the mouth and lips. HSV2, the blisters can manifest on the inner thigh, vagina, the vulva, cervix, penis, and the anus. So we look at these pictures over here. The top picture is HSV1, that's the cold sore, that's the blister we're going to see on the lips. And as you can see, it's pretty easy if you're to kiss someone, that they would come in direct contact with that. That's pretty hard to avoid. And then these bottom 2 pictures here are actually HSV2 genital herpes. It functions the same thing. As you can see, if during sexual contact, these are pretty easy to come in contact with. And one important thing to note is that they can manifest on the inner thighs and some more spread out places, which is important when we talk about prevention later. Well, prevention right here. Be aware and avoid contact if you have active symptoms. That's the number one way. That's the best way to prevent the spread of herpes, HSV1 and HSV2. It's very common. It's like a lot of people have it. It's very common. The best way to prevent it is just to be aware and know that if you're having an active flare-up of blisters and whatnot for HSV1 or HSV2, to avoid contact with people. And for HSV2, basic STD prevention techniques are helpful. But however, as mentioned before, the blisters and the symptoms and stuff, they can materialize around just the inner thigh region, and basic STD prevention techniques such as condoms aren't going to offer protection against contact if it's on your inner thighs and whatnot. So again, it's just something to be aware of. If you're having a flare-up, it's best to just avoid that contact. There's no preventative medicine or vaccine, only symptom-suppressing medicines, and some of those symptom-suppressing medicines have gotten pretty good, but there is no cure for this. Once it's in the bloodstream, it's there forever. Those flare-ups will happen every once in a while, and that's when you're at your most infectious, and most people are asymptomatic, but I'll get to that in the next slide. So how common is this? It's actually very common. 3.7 billion people under the age of 50 are infected with HSV1, which is the oral herpes of the mouth. Over 491 million people are infected with HSV2, which is the genital herpes. And most of these infections of oral and genital herpes are asymptomatic, so they never manifest their symptoms. And I'm a visual guy, so I wanted to see what that 491 million people and that 3.7 billion people looks like. So down here in the bottom right, that's what 67% looks like on a pie chart. 67%, 3.7 billion people is 67% of the world population, and that's a lot of people. And then 13% equates to the 491 million people that are infected with HSV2. That's up here. It's still a pretty large chunk, and this is it's a pandemic. It's a pretty widespread pandemic. It's one of the most infectious, like the most people infected with it, diseases. And it was interesting to look at during research. I got all this information from the World Health Organization, and they broke it up into different regions, and regions such as the Southern Pacific or Southeast Asia or Central Africa. Those regions had the highest percentage of infections per capita per population. And so it's interesting to look at. Maybe those areas have less access to running water, to healthcare, to health information, and just the lack of ability to have general hygiene. Such things like that comes with running water could lead to more people becoming infected to it, instead of the Europe and the Americas region, which had far less infections. So herpes is actually not very dangerous. There's not many complications that come from it. A lot of people are infected. It doesn't have a very high mortality rate. However, there is a particular thing that comes with herpes that is quite scary, and this is the neonatal herpes. This is when infants become infected with HSV1 or HSV2, and it's very dangerous for them, as I'll talk about here. An estimated 65% of pregnant women in the U.S. are infected with the HSV1 or HSV2 virus, herpes. Infants can come in contact with infection while passing through the birth canal. So, these lesions are the sores and whatnot, and coming in contact with the blood during the birthing process. That's how the baby's able to come in contact with it, and it can be transmitted to them. 1 in 3,200 infants become infected with HSV at birth, and this doesn't sound like a lot, but you'll see its mortality rate is pretty dangerous. The 85% mortality rate in untreated cases, and 50% in recognized treated cases. So that's a pretty scary number, if even once it's recognized and it's treated, it's got a 50% mortality rate. So it makes you think about all the areas in the world that don't have incredible healthcare and hospitals, and these things are going completely unnoticed, and it's a lot of babies are dying from it. So this is something that's important, and when you're a pregnant mother and you go to the hospital, they test you for this, and they put you on the proper antivirals, and they do the proper procedures to protect your baby if you're having a herpes flare up at the time of your pregnancy. So that is probably the most scary thing that I learned about herpes. Overall, it's very common, it's very infectious. Prevent it by just being aware and knowing if you're having a flare up to avoid contact with other people. So yeah, that's my herpes presentation. Thank you guys. Look forward to trying to answer some questions on Wednesday. So thank you very much.